opening prayer in number 169.
finishes this thought with, the things which you learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. What he basically tells them is, go and think about all the biblical things I taught you. He says, think about what I taught you, and then think about that. And it all comes from the Bible. Now, we have this Bible. Most people that Paul was writing to didn't have this book. In fact, much of the New Testament was even written at this time. We have it. When you talk to yourself, when you excuse what you're doing or think about things that you do, what Bible verses come to your mind? I mean, do you even know what Jesus taught about homosexuality? Or the necessity of not just believing in God, but obeying Him? Or how you should act when others mistreat you? He talked about it. Does that come to your mind? Is that what you tell yourself when you are being mistreated? Can you find those passages? Can you ponder on them? And listen, take a second in there to thank Him for something. That's why He says to do it. Thank Him. Looking at a blessing He gave you, because you'll start to see more. 2, you have to do what we read David said. You have to search the Bible for God's precepts and ways. How can you meditate on God's precepts and ways if you haven't searched them? And 3, take time to prayerfully ponder and memorize passages you read. That starts to become part of the way you think. Let me give you an example, okay? Where you just feel despair. And you study the Bible some, and you're looking on what to meditate on. And you find this passage in 2 Corinthians. And in your despair, here's what Paul wrote. Therefore, we do not lose heart. He says this over and over again. We're down, but we keep going. We do not lose heart. Even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. What does that mean? You have to really think deeply about that, connecting it to other things, especially that Paul wrote, and you would start to understand, wow, that's true. I may be suffering outwardly problems in my life, but in here, something important is happening that God is doing. How's He doing that? You could spend an hour with this text, but you've got to come to mind. You've got to go pick it up and read it again. You've got to think, what is God telling me here? That's why you prayed first. You prayed first. You asked Him to take you to the scriptures you need to go to. He says, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. What does that mean? Well, we do beings. We can call this the human mindset. The second way we call spiritual. As a pastor, I'm asked all the time about how to deal with negative emotions and uncontrolled thoughts. And the only way that we can find that life-changing answer is to become spiritually minded, which involves a total transformation. You know, today we're talking about tools used to help in that transformation. Prayerfully study to learn God's precepts and ways, and then taking time to think about those ways so you can learn how to live. You know, a spiritual mindset isn't learning to find your inner self, it's relating to God. Understanding how God loves you, how God understands your problems, and how God actually wants to change your dysfunctional mindset. He wants to change it. You've heard on Beyond today when we talk about authentic Christianity as a way of life. You can only experience that way of life by having a biblically based spiritual mindset. We're all complex, aren't we? But you know, when you break down the way we think, there's 2 basic human mindsets. 2 broad categories. Remember what the Apostle Paul wrote. Be carnally minded is death. Be spiritually minded is life and peace. The more naturally you and your mindset, the more your life will reflect certain characteristics, which Paul called death. The more spiritual your mindset, the more your mindset will be in line with God's vision for your life, and the more your life will produce a different set of characteristics, which Paul called life. This concept of mindset here. He says, for those who live according to the flesh set their minds, they choose to think about and meditate on the things of the flesh. But those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it's not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be. So that those who are in the flesh cannot please God. Now, we're all in the flesh. But what he's talking about here is that if all we think about is our gratification, the things we get, the way we feel, if that's all we think about, what we collect, then we have a problem. Because the normal human mindset, without God's intervention, according to what he said, means we become the enemies of God. We become the enemies of God. Now let's look at what the negative emotions and problems that we have with a human normal mindset. It is driven by emotions and motivations that are selfish. A free copy of Tools for Spiritual Growth. This will help you find peace of mind. And to order your free copy, then you need to go to beyondtoday.tv or call the number on your screen. Because our minds are bombarded with information all the time. And it's hard to even know what's true and false. The Bible has to be our guide. And these thoughts have to become our thoughts. And like everything else on Beyond Today, it's absolutely free. So go to in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. Now, if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, he is not his. This is explained, by the way, in this Tools for Spiritual Growth study guide. Without God's interaction with us, we can't have the spiritual mindset. We can't learn to replace our self-talk with God's precepts and ways. So let's look at, what does it mean to have a spiritual mindset? Well, first of all, our thoughts are based in God's precepts and ways, okay? And we desire to do good and love others. It accepts and submits to God as the source of knowledge and authority. We look to God and His Word to determine the values of our lives. And that means that if you have a spiritual mindset, you develop a value system that is able to determine the difference between good and evil, because it's not based on your inner thoughts. It's based on what God says, which become your inner thoughts. You see, we have to replace the natural mindset with something else. And you can learn the difference between foolishness and being wise. And also, and this is very important, the more spiritual our mindset, the more our relationships are filled with, instead of what's in it for me, but is desire to help others, as it comes from God. And it can only be developed teaches us that there are two mindsets. The natural human mindset that leads to death, and the spiritual mindset that leads to life. Remember, now we'll go through the God's precepts and ways. How does God really think about something? You really find that in the life of Jesus Christ. What does He really think? You know, when you're in a situation where someone has treated you badly, and your initial reaction is to go yell at them, to go mistreat them, and so what stops us? Jesus Christ thought. And you've studied that, and you've meditated on that. His thought comes into your mind, and you say, oh, okay. And then you have to take time to prayerfully ponder, and you have to memorize Bible. You have to think about it, so that what you read and hear literally becomes your soul. There are a lot of New Age and Eastern religious meditations to ponder and think about God and Jesus Christ. It is to ponder God's precepts and His ways. It has replaced your natural way of thinking with his way of thinking. So the Bible
That is the way the kings operate there. So if a king chose to follow, even the people is ruling over, they follow after him. And on the other hand, if a king chose to follow after God, people followed him also. That is what happened in the land of Israel. Remember, after Solomon, Israel was split into two. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. They were serving in the temple of God. But the northern kingdom were given over to idolatry, especially through Jeroboam, who led a revolt against Rehoboam that succeeded Solomon. So the influence of a king matters a treaty between you and me, as there was between my father and your father. See, I have sent you a present of silver and gold. Come and break your treaty with Baasha, king of Israel, so that you will withdraw from me. This is when he got it wrong. Let's look at chapter 14. There's an interesting part of his life that we need to look at there. And the Lord gave them rest all around. There was rest. In the time of the reign of Asa. 16. Also he removed Makkah. Okay, let's jump from that. 17. But the high places were not removed from Israel. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was loyal all his days up to that time. Then, 18. He also brought into the house of God the things that his father had dedicated, and that himself had dedicated silver and gold and the utensils. Then, 19, very importantly. And there was no war until the 35th year of the reign of Asa. So he had peace for 35 whole years. Why? He was loyal to God. His heart was loyal to God. And then look at the mistake he now made. When his heart became disloyal to God, that was when he now began to have war, according to the prophecy of the man of God, Seer, the Hanani. Let's look at another action. Now, if your heart is loyal to God, and you even made a mistake, and you are opportuned to see someone to correct you, should you now become proud? Should you now become pompous? What kind of attitude should you put up? Let's see what happened to King Asa. from verse